Lesson 3 in Module 4 is on comparing quantities with percent. And really, we're going to take that equation I introduced you to in the last lesson, and we're going to just make it maybe a little bit more specific. So let's start there. Remember, the equation we had was part equals percent times whole. But now we're going to be talking about quantities, okay? You have a quantity of something, you have a value, a number of something, right? This is going to be our part. So we're really not going to say part anymore. We're going to say quantity. So it's quantity equals percent times whole, okay? So a couple other hints I want to give you and one reminder. Let's start with a reminder. Percent, remember, means per 100. Okay, and that's going to come into play kind of in our opening exercise here. Percent means per 100. How many, that quantities is that value, how many are there per 100? And if what we're working on is if it's not out of 100, how do we figure that out? Hints now, we have the word is, okay? When you see the word is, remember that means it equals, okay? Something is 5 or is, whatever. It means equals, okay? And then the other word that we are going to be looking for is the word of. And we've talked about in the past how the word of means to multiply. So in our equation up here, our quantity we're going to say is the is part. Notice it's right by the equal sign. And our whole quantity, it's out of something, that's going to be our whole. Notice of means to multiply. So we're of like times the whole is we put with the quantity. Okay? And the other couple examples, we're going to go through that again. So this is our setup. Now let's talk about, again, quantities. We're comparing that with percent. Percent is always per 100. Quantities not necessarily. Okay? So it says a 10 by 10 unit square represents one whole. Then what percent is represented by the shaded region? Well, our shaded region, okay, you can see this whole part here is shaded. Hopefully the copy came out good enough that you can see that. And then we also have a section over here that's shaded. Now let's think about what we know. If I were to say, what percent represents this whole square here, right? This 10 by 10 unit square represents one whole. What percent of that square do we have? Hopefully you would say 100%. The whole thing is filled in, it's 100%. Excuse me. So we have 100%, but we have some more. Okay, so again, this is out of 100 per 100, but how many of these do we have? So if you were to count them, you would see that we'd have 25. Okay, so we have 25% of this square filled in and 100% of this one. So if you put both these together, what percent is represented by the shaded area? It would be 125%. Okay, so now we want to use that idea and compare things. So here's what we mean. In the model above, 25% represents 10 students. Okay, how many students does the shaded region represent? Okay, so 25 represents 10. 25% represents 10 students. So, how many 25% do we have? So if we look here, we can break this 100 up. Again, guys, this is just a visual. Okay, we can break this 100 up into 25s, can't we? How many 25s are in 100%? 4 of them, right? So I have a total of how many 25% right here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 25%. So I can take 25%, and if I multiply that by 5, that gives me 125%. That's what we have. So if each one of these 25s represents 10 students, and we have 5 of those 25s, that means we're going to have 50 students because 10 times 5 is 50 students. Okay? Because again, if this is 10, this is 5 students, or I'm sorry, 10 students and 10 students and 10 students and 10 students and 10 students, that's a total. We have 5, 10 students, right? So that's a total of 50 students. So this is kind of a visual of what we're doing. Now let's get back to our equation, okay? And I need you to write down the equation every single time, okay? Because if you look at this and say, well, I'm going to multiply or I'm going to divide, you're going to get confused, okay? So just really follow along with what I write down. Okay, the members of a club are making friendship bracelets to sell to raise money. Anna and Emily made 54 bracelets over the weekend. They need to produce 300 bracelets by the end of the week. What percent of the bracelets were they able to produce over the weekend? Okay, always on the side, write these 3 words. Quantity, whole, percent. Now, if you can do this, you're going to make the problem really easy. The more you write down, actually, the easier the problem is. So I'm going to write this down. So remember, the easiest thing to pick out is the percent because it has a percent sign. I don't have any percent signs here. It says what percent. So I'm going to say, give that a variable. I'm going to call it P. Oops, I'm going to try to make it a little neater. Okay, so now we have quantity and whole. We have 54 bracelets, and that's 300 by the end of the week. So which one is my whole? And hopefully you're thinking 300, right? We want a total 300 bracelets. And our quantity is the part, remember? This is what we were talking about before. Quantity is part. That's going to be 54. Now, if you can get to that part, you write down your equation. And don't worry, it's not always going to stay this long. We'll start doing some shortcuts. But for right now, we got to understand each part. If you write down your equation, all you have to do is plug in what you know. Quantity, that's 54, equals percent. I don't know what percent is. That's P. Times whole, that's 300. Now, I know this part tends to confuse us because we're like, well, what do we have to do with this part? Use your knowledge of solving equations. We've already went over that, okay? What are you solving for? Well, I'm solving for P. I want P all by itself on this side of the equal sign. So what is preventing me from having that? Well, 300. How do I get rid of that 300? Well, we're multiplying, so we do the opposite of multiplying, the inverse of multiplying, we divide. 300 divided by 300 is 1p. Bring down my equal sign. Grab a calculator. 54 divided by 300. This is what I mean. Some people might guess right that we divide, but they might go 300 divided by 54. Write it in the equation. You don't even have to worry about it. Do what it tells you. 54 divided by 300, and we get 0.18. Now remember, we always want to make sure we're answering the question being asked, and the question is what percent? Well, this isn't a percent. This is a decimal. So go back to when we were converting percents and decimals. If I have a decimal and I want to make a percent, I move it 2 places to the right and add the percent sign. So what percent of the bracelets were they able to produce over the weekend? 18% of the bracelets. Again, the more you write down, the easier and the less you have to think. Okay, so let's look at another example real quick. Anna produced 32 bracelets of the 54 bracelets produced by Anna and Emily over the weekend. Write the number of bracelets that Emily produced as a percent of those that Anna produced. Okay, so let's do this. Anna produced how many? 32. Emily produced how many? Well, Anna produced 32 of the 54 bracelets. Well, we can just subtract 54 minus 32, and that'll give us Emily's 22. Okay, so it doesn't come out and say Emily made 22, but then we have the total, and we know how much Anna made. Okay, so now we have quantity, whole, percent. First thing we're supposed to find, percent. We don't have a percent, so there it is, P. So now we have to figure out quantity and whole. Well, we want to write the number of bracelets that Emily produced as a percent of those that Anna produced. Of those that Anna produced. Of remember, is our whole. So even if you can't quite figure out what the total is on this one, look for the keywords, okay? Whole is going to be Anna's 32, which by process of elimination means quantity is going to be Emily's 22. Okay. And again, real quick, quantity, I know I'm going to get sloppy here, equals percent. I'm going to just put a percent sign times whole. Fill in what you know. 22 equals P times 32. What are we solving for? P. What do I have to do to get P all by itself on the right side of the equal sign? Get rid of 32. It's times 32. How do we do that? Well, we divide. Whatever we do to one side, you do to the other. And when you take your calculator and go 22 divided by 32, you get 0.6875. Remember, that's a decimal. Change it into a percent, and you get 68.75% of the bracelets. So Anna produced 68.75% of the bracelets they made that weekend. One more, real quick. Quantity. Whole. Percent. Write the number of bracelets that Anna produced as a percent of those that Emily produced. See that keyword of right here? Okay, so it's the same information here. I don't know what the percent is. Of those that Emily produced, of, remember, is my whole. So Emily now put 22 here, which means Anna's 32 is our quantity. All we did here is switch these two around because we switched Emily and Anna around. Quantity equals percent times whole. Our quantity in this case is 32. We don't know what the percent is, but we know our whole is 22. Again, we're solving for P, so we have to get rid of the 22. It's times 22, so we're going to divide both sides by 22. We're going to grab our calculator and go 32 divided by 22, because that's what it tells us to do. And we get 1.4545, on and on and on. Okay? So I'm going to move it 2 places to the right, and I'm going to get 145.45%. Okay, maybe say approximately, because it's going to be repeated. Okay, so Emily made over 145% of what they did together. Okay, so again, the more you write down with this, and if you're using your equation, the easier the problem will be, the easier it'll be to compare quantities with percents.